Hello, everybody. Mike Erre and Tim Stafford, the Vox Podcast. Because we're middle-aged men and have nothing better to do, we have a podcast. That's why we're here. It's glorious. But today...
That's a great selling point.
Today, yes, the world needs more. Although we started early. We're over 5 years old, Timothy, just in case you were wondering.
Nice.
Yes, so that's in podcast years, that is a 30. That's a 30-something. We are joined today by one of the favorite people I have met and one of the favorite people I have followed on the tweet. So we're joined by two people. I just want to clarify. My friend Tyler, who has been on the show before, who is planning a church in Cincinnati. Tyler, hello.
Hello, Mike.
Tyler Cherneski
Yes.
is a bit of a rock star. He was a well-known financier and architect in Kansas City, and moved to Cincinnati to plant a church, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And would you say, Tyler, your commitment level to Kelly Clarkson to what would you liken it?
I have been a ranked member of her global fan club in the past. She was by far, you get that Spotify wrap up, Mike. I know you probably had lots of Pearl Jam. Definitely in the top point whatever percent for Kelly World. So I'm so in.
Nice.
I am so in.
Is there a name for, like, are there the Clarkstons? I mean, is there a name for that group?
Unfortunately, no. This fan club, gosh, it used to be called the Celebrities. I did not like that, and they've since retired that name. So that feels like an intern's last decision was to start that group, and then it was ended. So I was at one point a celebrity, but no more. I'm just, I'm
Nice.
crazy.
Okay.
I'm in.
Okay.
I'm dedicated. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. and then introduce. So I get to meet her for the very first time, but I followed her on Twitter for years. Bridget Eileen Rivera, known as the Traveling Nun in my Twitter handles. Bridget, hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you and Tyler kind of know each other?
Yeah, so Tyler and I know each other, I guess, through the Side B Revoice celibate gay Christian conversation. And we met each other, I guess, a couple years ago at Revoice in, what was that, 2018? Was
that the St. Louis one?
Yeah, in St. Louis. And we are connected to kind of, I guess, the similar spheres within the gay Christian world. And that's how we met, and that's how we've known each other.
And what do you do besides unveil awesome tweets and thoughts? What kind of consumes the rest of your life?
So I spend most of my time researching and writing. I just this past year wrote a book on LGBTQ discrimination, and lesser known is that I do research. I'm currently getting my PhD. I do research at the intersection of gender, sexuality, and crime. And that sounds really interesting to people. They're like, what does gender and sexuality have to do with crime? Well, that's a whole conversation that we can have at another podcast.
Right.
But so that's what I spend most of my time doing. And publicly, I spend a lot of time doing advocacy for LGBTQ Christians in particular.
Yeah. And that's how I came across you and Tyler and Nate Collins and many others. And this incredible movement of people who are kind of getting shot at from both sides of the equation. Would you tell us just a little bit? We've had the privilege of hearing a bit of Tyler's story in the past. Would you tell us just a little bit about how you came to this place of passion and advocacy and this particular topic? Your book's coming out next year, and how has it been that this has become sort of a life focus for you?
Yeah, so I am a Christian and I'm also queer. I'm also a lesbian.
Hold on a second. I need to just stop you there. Okay, go ahead.
So those things are me. I am a Christian and I am also gay. And so I guess that right there is kind of, for me, the nexus of what kind of has propelled me into specifically LGBTQ advocacy, my experiences in the church, my experiences within Christianity, and just also seeing other LGBTQ Christians just really struggling to find a place for themselves in the church. And so experiencing that struggle, also seeing it, has really, I guess, made that issue a very important thing for me to speak to increase awareness about it for people.
Yeah. What do you see happening in the church, kind of with the church, whatever that means, that gives you hope for how things are going?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of things that do give me hope. I think first and foremost, I think that there is more awareness that is happening. I think especially within, I guess, the younger demographics, loosely defined as like, from like anywhere from like the 20s up to the 40s, like, that kind of demographic, I think is really open to the conversation and to learning new ways to think about LGBTQ people and new ways to engage that conversation. And so I see a lot of hope for the conversation turning a new leaf, especially as we look into the next few years and, where the church is headed. I see a lot of hope for progress as people are, especially with purity culture being challenged now. And, so much of an anti-gay sentiment in the church is so intricately wrapped up in purity culture. And so as people are beginning to kind of unpack purity culture and all of the ways in which that was not helpful for people, they're starting to see, this also applies for talking about things like homosexuality and these other issues. And so I see there being a lot of hope for the conversation really moving in positive directions. Thank you for that. This is a question for both of you. How did you guys, or did you experience purity culture if you were raised in the church? I don't know, Tyler, I think yes. You were, right? Bridget, I wasn't sure if you were as well. Yeah. So what was purity culture like for you? Tim and I have talked about it a bit from our perspectives, but I'd love to hear what your experience with it was. And what were some of the core messages you received from it?
I think a core message that I received, and then that was fascinating as it mixed with my own journey through sexuality, was like one of the worst things you could do was have sex with a girl because of my, so me being a guy. The worst thing you can do to have sex with a girl, because pregnancy is going to inevitably happen the first time. You're going to ruin your life. It's going to make God so sad, and then no one will ever want to be with you again. And so I think that became, in my experience, internalized in such a way where it's like, okay, there's this other sexuality thing going on. I've got to work through the fact that I'm attracted to guys, but I guess I've dodged a bullet there, and that the wrath of purity culture isn't coming down on me because that's not happening. So even as I was, and I know I shared this when I was on here last time, even as I was like hooking up with different guys or something in high school, that strangely got a purity culture pass because it wasn't fitting the very narrow definition of what it meant to be quote unquote pure in purity culture standards as it was taught to me, which is fascinating. So I'm just chuckling about that now. Wow. But yeah, I was as I'm not doing that, I guess I'm fine, even though there was all this other mess happening in my life.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'd never thought of that. That is so fascinating. Yeah. What about you, Bridget?
Yeah, so I guess similar to Tyler, I grew up in like this context where having sex was like the worst thing that you could possibly do. But ironically, also, it was the best thing that you could possibly do at the same time. And that's like always the, contradiction within purity culture. Like sex is the worst thing. But if you can hold out and just wait for like that magical day when you get married, then it is going to like be the answer to everything in your life that you ever hoped and you ever dreamed for. And it's going to be incredible. The, ultimate fulfillment of everything. And so there's that contradiction. And so, yeah, I was definitely taught to like see sex as like both like the worst possible thing, but also like the thing that is the answer. And, marriage is, this like, held up on this pedestal as like the most wonderful thing in the world. God's best gift to mankind is what marriage is. And it is the only reason why civilization has not crumbled into dust yet, is because we have marriage. Like all of these concepts, just like putting marriage on this huge, huge pedestal. And then, for me as a woman also, being taught, these ideas that like I am responsible for a man's sexual behavior, how he responds to me sexually. And it was very, bizarre. I remember when I remember reaching an age when I was, started going through puberty and, started, I guess, like what they say, becoming a quote unquote woman, whatever that means. And suddenly all of these rules erupted in my life. I remember I was like leaning over a counter once. And like a man came up to me and was like, "Oh my gosh, like stand up straight. Like, how can you like lean over like that?" And I was so, taken back because I was like, what was I doing? I was just leaning and, just chatting and, but like apparently the way I was leaning, like with my, butt sticking out and like leaning over and, it's just apparently that was enough to cause a man to stumble, which I was then responsible for. And so, all of these rules, just erupt in your life. And it's very confusing, when you're a woman. And then, on top of that, these, ideas of, female submission and, you have to, submit to the men, which then kind of turns into this idea that like, women are responsible for men's behavior and, anything that, they do wrong is actually something that you did wrong. And, it all just kind of gets very, jumbled up. And I mean, I say all that I had a, great childhood. And, I'm very grateful for my upbringing. But, those things definitely stick with you and really leave a mark and, really make it hard to, when you start asking, hard to answer questions, it really starts to, leave you without very many good answers.
Yeah. Can you remember a couple of, were there moments in you that stick out in either of your minds where those messages sort of fell apart for you?
I think where purity culture ultimately failed me as I got more serious about following Jesus is just, what do you do when you are so impure? By the time that I'm serious about, in college, my story, I'm serious about following Jesus again. I mean, in a very real sense, it's like, gosh, is it too late? I mean, there's way too many people out there in the world that I've been with. I mean, it's just one of those things like, holy cow, if this is the best that even, a church or Christian community has to offer, I feel ineligible. It's like the one, and this guy, Richard Beck, has a great book called Unclean about purity. And when he talks, he has all these excellent illustrations, but one of them, like just the smallest drop of urine in a big glass of wine taints the whole thing. thing. And it's, he's cueing into the psychology of disgust. And it's like, sure, as soon as he does that illustration, it's like, yeah, I don't want to drink the pea wine. But it's also like, if you make that a human being, is that really true? And how does that work? And what does our faith say? And I mean, it's fascinating stuff to me. But I think where it failed me was where it's like, okay, now if I'm serious about following Jesus and people are pointing me to these resources, I feel automatically ineligible from the beginning, like doomed before you start.
Oh my goodness.
Which Bridget, gosh, I have, Mike, I know, Tim, I know this is your guys' show. I just have this burning question for you, Bridget. Well, no, Bridget, as you've studied, I'm fascinated, like criminality and criminalization. Have you seen parallels between your study of like criminology, what it means to be criminal, and purity culture like that? It helped me. I think I felt that way. I never thought about it until you mentioned your other research. But I mean, what are those connections that you see?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many connections that can be made, but one of them that I think is interesting is just the ways in which like this concept of traditional family values came to be weaponized politically. And especially when you look at the 80s, which is when we really see evangelicalism really finally came to align itself with republicanism. What you see in this, and I talk about this a little bit in my book, you see what's called in criminology the creation of a folk devil. And what a folk devil is it's when these very like sensationalized accounts of moral decline get attached to a scapegoat, and they get blamed for all of the social evils that are going on. Wow. And so folk devils are very common throughout history. During the Salem witch trials, the women that were burned at the stake and called witches, quote unquote witches, those were folk devils. There was a lot of fear and panic over spiritual, decline and sin and the devil coming to I don't know, take us or whatever. And so like these women were then labeled witches, and they were burned at the stake. And we see that also, the Holocaust is another example. Jewish people were a folk devil. There was a lot of panic and worry about German decline during this time. And so, Jewish people got all of the blame for that. And so we saw that happen in the 80s. With the creation of a gay folk devil, where gay people kind of like,
wow,
you see this like traditional family values and this panic that the family is in decline, that marriage is under attack, that like everybody is going off the sexual deep end. And so gay people were like the perfect scapegoat for all of those fears, all of those worries.
Did that correspond at all to the rise of AIDS?
Well,
at least in the national stage?
Yeah, it was, really interesting because AIDS then erupted, in, 1981, right around the same time that this was going on. And, homosexuality was being heavily criminalized at this time. And, conservative evangelicals had just started in 79 this massive campaign to prevent gay people from having protection against employment discrimination. So all of this is going on. Homosexuality is criminalized. And then in 81, AIDS erupts. And it was like, see, God agrees. And
wow. I remember that. that.
Yeah. And so you have all of these things going on. And it was like gay people were the perfect person to blame for all of the bad things happening with sex, marriage, and family. And you still see that to this day. You still see that where, anything that goes wrong in society, it's the gays, it's the gay agenda. And people have such a hard time not associating gay people with this anti-Christian, anti-family, anti-marriage agenda that really is the creation of, a phantom in people's imagination.
Wow.
Yeah, Tyler, you get to interrupt and ask questions anytime if that's the kind of stuff you're bringing to this. Wow.
Well, because I took a class on criminal. So Khalil Muhammad, you might know him, Bridget, the Schonberg Center, and they're in New York. So talking about his book is The Condemnation of Blackness. Okay. But similarly, he uses data to talk about how did we get this view of a black criminal in mind, and uses social science data. It's phenomenal. But I wondered if there was a similar story. And I mean, everything you're saying, Bridget, it just clicks for me. And to see it play out culturally and then also play out in churches too. Yep. I mean, I know we've talked before, even Mike and Tim last time we were here, but inconsistencies in church world where there's a sharp laser eye on any, sexual sin related to gay folks, but holy cow, all the intentional blind spots for any other kind of sexual sin out there in the church. And honestly, Bridget, this folk devil piece, is helping me make sense of that, or think about why is one thing the scapegoat when there's all these other things that according to Jesus's teaching aren't, this isn't God's ideal either. And yet total intentional blind spots there. Just fascinating stuff.
Yeah, divorce is at the top of that list, right? The just great permissiveness of divorce, the acceptance of contraception. There are so many tectonic shifts in evangelical thought and practice. Yep. And so how? First of all, this is thank you both. I'm always struck by the heavy loads you've had to carry. And your book's named Heavy Burdens, right?
Yep, that's the name.
Which totally,
that's the title.
Yeah. I if not, it should be, because but as I'm hearing you speak, I'm like, okay, I came out of purity culture with some jacked up stuff, let alone wrestling with my, what it would have been like wrestling with a sexuality that all I heard from the church was just, it's unmentionable. Like you don't talk about gay. That's not a category that's even discussed. You just have premarital sex and adultery, and that's it. And I don't want to rush to this, but I'm so freaking curious. What does a robust theology of sexuality, if we agree that purity culture wasn't it, and we still think there's room somewhere for Jesus's ethic, what is a healthy or healthier theology of sexuality look like today, based on what you guys have experienced and what you've learned and what you've seen? Where do we start with that conversation?
I'll let you go first, Tyler.
I was going to wait you out. So maybe just for everybody else, the more brilliant answer is coming after this one. What I'd want to do to start is to probably contextualize human sexual relationships alongside other forms of human relating. So what I think Bridget already said so well is that one of the errors in purity cultures, you make, sex the great devil and the greatest good of human, just of human existence. And so how do you put sex back in a spot where it has a place? It's one way that humans relate. And this is how, again, Mike, you said, how do we put Christian conviction around it? This is how Jesus defined this way we relate. But look, there's also this way we relate. And there's being friends, and there's being neighbors, and there's being coworkers, and there's being good. And some of that I think would be just so helpful for all people, for gay people. Specifically gay people that might have a Christ following ethic similar to Bridget and I's, where it's like, gosh, we see following Jesus as being something that means we don't have a sexualized gay relationship. It's like, well, if that's the case, then holding up sex as the greatest human good and then saying you can't have it isn't quite working. Placing it alongside other types of relating and talking about how those work together could be more helpful. And the other piece I'd want to do that, again, if I'm thinking purity culture, no one in church world ever prepared me for bad sex. No one prepared me for gay sex either. And then maybe this is too, if we need to label this podcast E for explicit, Tim, go for it. But I think that that's another reality of something missing in church teaching, is just like, there is that promise that you mentioned, Bridget, is like, if you wait, it's going to be great. Yeah. It's just like, gosh, what kind of help does that do for sisters and brothers that, have bought into that message and that hasn't been the experience? There aren't conversations in churches I've been a part of about bad sex, the difficulties, the challenges, how to work through stuff. Go to this counselor. I mean, that is another entirely missing conversation that I think if it was placed alongside other forms of human relating, we can get help in any of these forms of relating in the same way that you'll get counseling here, you can get counseling there. I mean, there's so many things I would do to change that up, but those are my first few stabs in the dark.
Yeah. Boy, that's excellent. It really strikes me that the church has contributed to the idolization of the very thing it's been trying to war against, right? I mean, it's actually facilitated the brokenness. And I guess I knew that abstractly, but hearing you guys, I'm like, oh yes, that totally makes sense. Of course, it's just a way of relating. Mm-hmm. It's not the greatest good. It's not the greatest evil. I'm sorry, Bridget. I know you were getting wound up. I just want to say though, Tyler, that was fairly brilliant. Okay, no doubt. Bridget's going to come and rock it. But I'm just saying that was solid, man. That was a solid intro.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that was an intro at all. I think that was the meat. That was like right there. That was good. And I 100% agree. And I mean, like you already said, so much that like I could have said. So like anything that I say is just like, sprinkles on top. I'm just like adding thoughts. But just like, again, to like sprinkle a few other thoughts on top, I would say, and this is completely in line with what Tyler was pointing about like this idea that like sex is either the greatest evil or the greatest good. I think alongside with like dialing that back and placing it alongside other things that have the potential for good as well as bad. I think also we need to take away this idea that what you believe about sexual ethics decides whether you go to heaven or go to hell. Because I think ultimately that is a denial of the gospel message. And when we tell people that you have to believe XYZ thing and you have to believe in accordance to those beliefs, well, then where does the gospel fit into that? If we're saying that you have to believe XYZ thing related to sexuality in order to get into heaven. And the gospel doesn't fit into that. And what winds up happening for LGBTQ people in particular is their faith comes to rest on their sexuality, and it rises and falls on whether or not you get the questions that you ask about your sexuality right or wrong. And that to me is anti-gospel. It is a, threat to the Christian faith itself when we say that in order to get into heaven, you have to get your sexuality right and you have to believe the right things about it in order to be a Christian.
That's a doozy.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Were you going to say something, Tyler? I didn't know if that was a raised hand.
It looked like you were about to say something. So.
Yeah, do it. I don't want to interrupt. You guys are going. Great.
Well, no, so this is where I need your help, Bridget. And it's just so good to see you. I can't wait to be together in person again and talk for hours. But here's something I felt. So we've been pastoring at our little church. What is going on in me, be my counselor for a hot second, where when I pastorally encounter people, even coming to our, little church, if we want to talk, we're over coffee, we're meeting on Zoom, and there's divorce in their background, my immediate urge is to go straight to like, gosh, and Jesus still accepts you. And, there's a place for you here in our church and we're so glad you're here. And there's no checks in my spirit. Even it's like, I'm already contemplating like, well, if they show up and they're going to remarry someone, I'd probably do it in our church. Well, all these things, it's just like, I'm conditioned that way. And we have a lot of gay folks at our church and I love it that way. But it's like, there is some of that even in my own heart. And I can consider myself really invested in this world, and I love gay folks, and I'm one of them, but it's just like there's still that pause sometimes to everything you're saying where it's like, well, yeah, but following Jesus, but this, but what if we don't do that, but what is this going to look like, and what path are you on, and how are you doing it? I mean, what's going on inside me? Do you have any thoughts? Maybe that's too bad of a question, but have you noticed that similar tension between like, gosh, I'm almost conditioned, habituated in this evangelical space to have big, massive grace for so many other things. And we're going to turn the blind eye, isn't even the right word, but it's like, this is fine. And we'll fall in grace for that. And we'll see you in heaven, even though you've been married twice before. And this is your third marriage and your third church. And who knows what happened on those first two. And I don't even know why they happened. And you're probably not even being fully forthcoming. And yet my dear gay friends in our church that I love and can relate to, it's like, I still get this, little tighten chest sometimes when we're talking. Not that it's the judging, like I'm thinking, oh, you're going to hell, but it's like, am I being a good pastor? I mean, I immediately second guess myself all the time. Am I doing the right thing? What do I do with that, Bridget? Yeah. Help me.
Well, I mean, I think
What is that?
Excuse me. I think you already, said it yourself, just in identifying the ways in which all of us are almost programmed to give grace to every heterosexual sin that we can fathom. And for some reason, we don't give that to people who are gay. And so, you brought up, examples of like divorce, remarriage. There's also contraception. And, those are really thorny questions for straight people. But for some reason, they're not treated as very thorny questions. And yet, historically, the Christian church was, very, very, had a very, very strong stance against those things. And so, to me, I think we already kind of have this understanding that giving people grace when it comes to sexual ethics is better than giving people judgment. And I think we already have that for straight people, even for, these very difficult questions related to, topics that maybe most straight people don't even think are that seriously. I sometimes talk to, straight people and they're like, well, same-sex marriage is a threat to the definition of marriage. And I'm like, well, what do you think divorce is and remarriage? Like if same-sex marriage is a threat to the definition of marriage, then like, how is divorce and remarriage not? And they'll say, well, marriage is, a lifelong union between one man and one woman. And I'm like, well, yeah, but like, why are you so, intent on that one man, one woman part? What about the lifelong union part? That's part of the Christian, definition. Contraceptive sex is another thing. I'll talk to some straight people who will be like, well, gay sex is just so unnatural. It's like against God's design. That's why it's, you can't be a Christian if, you're doing this terrible thing. But then I'm like, well, what is contraceptive sex? If gay sex is unnatural, and like, that's like an abomination because of that. Well, then what is contraception? Like, what is contraceptive sex? So we see all of these contradictions, and I don't think that's a reason to like suddenly go around judging all the straight people, because let's be real. If we use that bar, the bar that straight people use for gay people, if we use that bar for everyone, like nobody's getting into heaven except Mother Teresa and like maybe like a few other people. Like nobody's getting into heaven because that bar is not realistic. We understand that. And that Bible verse that says with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Well, let's take that measure that is used on gay people and let's see if this works for everybody else. And the answer is it doesn't, because when we make our salvation dependent upon our sexual beliefs and our sexual behavior, then our salvation is no longer dependent on Jesus Christ, who is supposed to be our savior. And so I think like we have to like dial this back. We have to like rethink about this. And the answer is not like, let's judge and condemn everybody. The answer is, let's think about how to apply the grace of the gospel to everybody, gay people included.
Yeah. No, that is, as a a pastor for many years. That I think was when this conversation became real to me, was when the double standards became so glaringly obvious. So I hear that and repent, and yearn for the church's repentance over that. So if you take that out of salvation, I mean, part of what I hear in Tyler's question is, okay, so let's move into the area of discipleship. Where does the ideal come in? So to my way of thinking, and correct me here, to my way of thinking, if the ideal is applied universally, then I'm okay with it being used. Meaning, just because I'm a heterosexual man and I'm married doesn't mean I'm living up to the Genesis 1 and 2 ideal. Right? Not simply in virtue of that. There's a whole bunch of commitments under that that represent the ideal. So I don't measure up to the Genesis 1 and 2 ideal in my mind. Where does that the holding out for the ideal, where does that come in to play in a gracious, healthier sort of sexual theology of sex? Does that make sense? You see what I'm asking?
Yeah,
yes. Is a test for heaven? You are absolutely right. None of us measure up to that. No way. And that double standard needs to be repented of. But when I'm sitting with somebody who's considering their third divorce or thinking about having an affair, there's a part of me that wants to, if they claim to be a Jesus follower, to say, hey, there is this path that we're to aim for. So where does that come in, do you think? Is that the check? Me, Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is that the check in your spirit?
Yes, Mike, that is the hardest thing. Well, and here's what I've done. So I get to talk a lot about sexuality stuff, and it's fun and I love it. But one of the things I've shifted, so I've gotten many different scripts over the years, or many ways I presented it, in telling my own story now, and probably in light of people like Bridget that have shaped me and helped me think better. I usually share my story now, and I now want to add the ingredient of time into my story for people that are listening, and help them say, hey, the fact that I'm following this path of celibacy, and I think Jesus is the absolute, like the most beautiful person in the world, worth emulating in every way. Sweet Jesus was single. I can be too. I mean, all that stuff there. It's like, that wasn't I heard one speaker and made that commitment. That's been a brewing over a decade journey of falling more and more in love with Jesus, and saying, okay, even though this feels difficult and tough and maybe impossible, and am I stupid, and am I going to regret this, and how's this going to work out? It's like, okay, I'm signing up for the Jesus following piece. So I don't think it fully answers everything that you just asked there, Mike, because pastorally there are those moments where it's like, hey, stop, change, no, that's not a great idea. And yet when I'm talking specifically, maybe in my mind, when I'm talking to other gay folks, I always want to add in time as another element of spiritual formation and growth. And I think, to your point, Bridget, what are some of the things that we've allowed some folks to have in their journeys and not allowed other people to have? Time feels like an ingredient of spiritual growth that just hasn't been permitted for any kind of sexual minority to take their time and enjoy. I mean, it's one of the first things I say, honestly, when people want to meet and talk about, my coming out and all of this that's happening. It's just like, okay, I hope you realize this isn't our one coffee and this isn't the 1 month thing. It's like, we're gonna, for a year now, here's some books and let's read all these different perspectives. I mean, I don't just recommend people that I would fully agree with. And the thing is, because I also trust too, it's like, man, if you see Jesus for who Jesus really is, I think you'll think he's worth following. But if we don't read widely now and talk widely now, you'll have that crisis of faith later and throw it all away. So let's take our time, let's count the costs and go. But all that to say, time, I think, is one missing ingredient.
And before we go to you, Bridget, because I'm waiting for the canon, Tyler, I think that's so, because I hear. So when I talk this way about double standards and grace and permission and time, one of the things I hear is, but you still have to preach the ideal. You still have to hold out the ideal. And I found that okay, but what they mean by that is a bait and switch. It's, hey, you're welcome as a gay person into our church, but you're not allowed, to you're 2 years in, and then you're not allowed to be in leadership or serve in children's or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's that sort of thing. And so I think I find that so incredibly powerful, because that I see that double standard probably the clearest. Hey, I was divorced 10 years ago. I've grown a lot since. We wouldn't just sit and have huge questions about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or I'm struggling with porn. It's been an issue for me, right? That's all just sort of given permission to grow and develop. And you're so right. This is not. Bridget, go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Tyler, you're right on the money. There's no space to grow. There's no space to question, especially. And I think that is, especially important for churches to give gay people, give them space to question without telling them what the answers are supposed to be in order for them to maintain their good standing in the church. So many people that I've talked to discussed the pressure, how suffocating the pressure is when you exist within a context where you cannot, by definition, you cannot question, because you know that if you arrive at an answer that is different than what the pastor arrives at, then you're out, you're done. Bye. And there's no space for intellectual honesty in an atmosphere that predicates your acceptance upon arriving at the correct conclusion. Like nobody can grapple with their faith, honestly, in an atmosphere where you have to arrive at the same answer that the pastor does. Otherwise, you're not part of the team anymore. And so I think, in addition to giving people time to grow, also space to, maybe come to conclusions that are different than what the pastor comes to, and have that be okay, and respect their faith journey, and their ability to wrestle with scripture honestly, and follow the work of the Holy Spirit and the lead of the Holy Spirit in their own lives. And that might be something that, the pastor, disagrees with, and other people in the church disagree with, and, might not be the perspective that he preaches and he teaches from. But if we don't give people this intellectual freedom to grapple with their faith and really ask questions, to come to, answers from scripture, if we tell people you can only ask questions that have answers the pastor gives you, then people aren't going to be really able to come to an honest place in their sexual, in their sex lives, with their sexuality. It's going to be just a performance. It's going to be an outworking of legalism. And people, really question this, and they're like, how can that be possible? Because sin, and, I'm going to be letting them fall into sin. And I think there's such an obsession with people falling into sin, when it comes to this question, that there's no ability to see that the ways that the pressures that we put on people are counterintuitive. And they, accomplish the exact opposite of what people want to accomplish. And we don't treat other theological questions this way. And I think the, doctrine of baptism is a really good example. Baptism is a sacrament. It's written in the creeds, for crying out loud. Jesus is the New Testament is on record saying that baptism saves you. This is integral to the faith. And yet I have never been hauled into a pastor's office and told that I was risking my salvation, or I might get kicked out of the church because I was questioning whether I was, whether I believed in infant baptism or believer's baptism. Nobody has ever done that to me. And the question of baptism is huge. 500 years ago, people were killing each other over this. It's that big of a topic in Christianity. And yet now we have learned to give space to people to think differently, believe differently, without necessarily being like, you're not one of us anymore. You're not really a Christian. We're not going to associate with you because you're a sinner. And so, I think we need to learn how to have that same kind of like respect across differences of conclusion that, and give people the benefit of the doubt, like, believe that their conclusions that they've come to are, theologically driven and scripture driven and, done through the, lead of the Holy Spirit, I think is just really important in order for people that do ultimately pursue traditional approaches to sexual ethics, in order for that to be healthy, in order for that to come from a place that is, legitimately pursuing Jesus Christ. Yeah.
And not just conforming to the pressure, play acting for acceptance. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, you guys. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I want to do this for the next couple of hours. So first of all, I'm gonna cut us off. Yes. That was outstanding. Tyler and Bridget, tell us where people can find you online, if you'd like. You don't need to or have to, but if you'd like to tell us where you're found, or Tyler, what your church is, or any of that stuff, tell us.
Yeah, our new baby church is in the heart of Cincinnati. You can read all about it. It's City Church OTR. That's for the neighborhood over the Rhine. So citychurchotr.com. That's probably the best spot. And I love this church. And Bridget, you're always an encouragement, but you're an encouragement this morning to me to continue to lean into some of the things we're leaning into in that little church. I mean, everything you're sharing of how does this work, and how do you have a pastor who's pretty committed to a strong side B ethic, and yet a big old group of people that may or may not agree. I mean, anyway, you're inspiring me to think better about that. But citychurchotr.com, we love it. Love this church and what God's doing there.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tyler, you're on the tweets as well.
I mainly I'm liking stuff. I'm giving Kelly Clarkson updates. It's you're my channel. You are my sole channel to Kelly, who's had a rough year this year. Rough year, yeah.
So I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Bridget, how about you?
You can find me online at my website, BridgetEileenRivera.com. You can get to my blog from there, as well as, my other stuff. You can also follow me on Twitter at Traveling Nun. And then also I've recently started becoming more engaged in Instagram. And so if you like Instagram and stuff like that, I'm on Instagram at Bridget Eileen Rivera.
I love it. My goodness. It's such a delight. Timothy, Tim told me, he texted me and he's like, hey, I'm gonna be super quiet on this, which is shocking because he's so talkative normally. But Timothy, you get the last word, my friend. Anything you want to add or any exclamation points you want to give?
No, this was wonderful. I think that folk devil thing is huge. Growing up in the 80s with focus on the family, right? That was the Dobson era of church formation. I experienced that exact thing from that vantage point. So there's a lot of unwiring to do with that. I do think that you guys are doing a wonderful job of tearing down those folk devils. So I think that's pretty rad. So this is very encouraging and informational for me, educational. I think you guys are rock stars.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, really. I mean, I learned so much from you both, and I'm so grateful for your heart for Jesus, your heart for people, your heart for his church, even though the church is, we've really dropped it and hurt a lot of people on these topics. So anyway, I want to thank you both very much for your time today. Appreciate you. Thank you. Look forward to talking again.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Vox Podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Vox Podcast. You can also engage with the hosts on social media at facebook.com/Vox Podcast, on Instagram at Vox Podcast, and on Twitter at Mike Erie. Thank you for walking this road with us.